Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this afternoon. My name is Amber Garrison Duncan. I'm a strategy director at Lumina Foundation, and so pleased to be able to be your moderator today. As we are getting started, again, this is for the Blockchain Innovation Challenge, and we're really excited you could join us. We are taking in your survey responses because we'd like to know who's in the audience and be able to communicate a bit more with you throughout the event. So you may be asked to put things into the Q&A so that we can pull those in as we continue our conversations over the next hour. We are pleased to know that 34% of you are from college, universities, or other post-secondary academic institutions. 24% of you are from nonprofit entities. And so thank you for again, taking the time to join us here today. Over the next hour, again, we're going to explore the potential of blockchain. We have some great key experts here to talk with you about the opportunity we have at hand at this moment in time for blockchain to help us advance our collective goals. We're also going to go over the Blockchain Challenge application, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions about that process. And at the end, we again would love to do an open Q&A from from our experts. And so we'll be preserving time at the end to be able to do that. But again, encourage you to keep your questions coming in the chat so we can understand when to best pick those up and field them to our experts. But again, just a little bit about this challenge is that, as you know, which the reason why you're here today is that the goal of this challenge is for us to pilot technology-enabled solutions that reorient the education and employment ecosystem around a student. We are really, again, excited about this challenge and glad you're able to join us today to learn more. Before we dive in, you can see here who you're going to be hearing from over the next hour. So again, I'm Amber here, and we have Luis Suarez from American Council on Education, John Domingue from Open University, Chris Purefoy from Learning Economy Foundation, Carrie Larimore from Open Works Group, and Taylor Hansen from the President's Forum. So again, some really amazing people who are just as excited about blockchain as you and I are today. Some housekeeping items that we want to be able to talk about. We already talked to you about the Q&A feature. Again, we're going to be collecting your questions through there. There is not a chat function for this webinar today. But also wanted to let you know we are going to record this session and it will be able to be accessed through the American Council on Education's Engage platform. So make sure you sign up there so that you can access this recording later. It's also a place for you to get continued support and ask future questions after this webinar as well. So, again, thank you for joining us, and we'd like to just dive in. So to kick us off, I would like to explore the opportunities that blockchain can bring to education. And so to do that, we're joined by two guests who are going to give us some examples and their perspective on this. So Chris, I'd like to turn to you first. Welcome. Again, we're glad to have you joining us and that awesome chair you have. So Chris, I would love to, can you please just introduce yourself to the audience so they know who you are and what you do, and then also let us know, like, what's the vision here? What if blockchain is adopted more broadly, what do you think its potential impact could be in education?
I'm very happy to be here. So yeah, I am Chris Purefoy. I'm the chairman of Learning Economy Foundation. And we're very enthusiastic about blockchain's role in the future. We think it's not only important, but a critical piece of the future infrastructure. And so, when you think about the vision that, can be created with these exciting new technologies, I think it's important first to say, what are the problems, right? And I think that when you really look at what's happened with education and where we find ourselves, for us, we believe that one of the biggest challenges is rooted in the fragmentation of the data, right? This is a big problem. And, schools don't talk with other schools, don't talk with universities, which don't talk to employers, which don't talk to government agencies. And this is just a legacy of old systems. And so, and from that, it creates a myriad of problems, right? You have human capital investors like governments and institutions who are having to really guess in how they invest in education. They don't have, really solid evidence on what's making impact. And so this is a really hard challenge, which creates a myriad of other problems, right? Which we know skills gaps are growing in every city across the world. The the skills that are being created are not the skills the world needs. And this is a problem, you know, and opportunity gaps and equity gaps are growing. You know, we've seen this with, you know, COVID and with, you know, digital education on the rise everywhere. You know, it's never been more of a challenge, right? I mean, what used to be an, you know, a homework gap where you couldn't, you know, learn at home the same as everyone else is now a real crisis because we have students and, you know, don't have access to data plans and don't have access to computers, right? And so they can't even be educated. And so it's a myriad of problems, right? That all kind of, you know, in many ways stem from the data problem. And so when you think about the future and the vision, right, we look at it as the seed of that being in another problem that we can solve with blockchain that can begin to solve the rest, which is that learners and employees don't have real access to their own information and data, right? I mean, you can get access to a transcript and you can write something on a resume, but essentially it's very fragmented, even in your own sense. And this is not only a, you know, a physical reality, but a psychological one, because as a learner, you know, if you know, I may not understand what equity means as I'm growing up, but I definitely am not going to understand it if I don't even have access to see what I've learned, right? But psychologically, when you begin to build a portfolio of education, which is what we can do with blockchain, which is really where it begins, right? With a digital wallet, right? Where I can have a portfolio on my phone or on my device that allows for me to save all of my skills and all of my transcripts and achievements, and I can have it all in one place. Not only can I share that now with everyone, and I can start to have a better access, you know, to the world around me and more opportunities, but I psychologically can begin understanding that I'm growing in equity in this. This is actually something I'm building. This is something that, you know, I can gamify. And so it's a very exciting future. And it begins with that digital wallet, right? And when you have that, you can start to do enormous, you know, change, right? You can start to build marketplaces on top. Like we can connect the learning applications and the games and the HR systems and the student registration systems. And we can begin to create an internet of education where all of those systems are communicating again, right? In a really safe way. That's another thing blockchain offers, right? With, you know, really advanced algorithms, and, you know, we can start to share that kind of information anonymously in a really safe way so that everyone can start to optimize for impact. And from there, you can add skills libraries and start to understand down to the course level what skills are being earned, right? And I can actually start to have a better understanding of my education, and my employers can have a better understanding of my skills, which is really critical in this new economy. And from there, we can, when you have that data in a really safe way, you can start to optimize pathways, right? And this is where it becomes really exciting, because I should have the ability to optimize my future in the same way that I can navigate to a sandwich, right? It sounds simplistic, but it should. It's a longer timeline, but I should be able to navigate like a GPS through the value centers, right? To the right education. And I should be able to alter that and change it as my life changes and my passions change and the needs of the world change, right? And so that's really the future, is a world where skills can be quantified like assets, right? So it has the same currency as a degree. Right, and where anyone in the world who has access to, you know, education, you know, can rise an agency and actually, you know, proactively create any future they want. So it's very exciting, and it all starts, you know, hinged on some of these new distributed ledgers. So it's a very exciting future.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. One, I always appreciate the passion you bring to this conversation because there is so much potential here. And I really appreciate your emphasis on, again, like learner agency, student agency, to own their data, to have access to that and be able to use that in the world as a currency. So thank you for that. John, I would love to bring you into the conversation. Thank you for joining us today. And so would love, again, for you to just share with the audience your name, a little bit about what you do. And then from your perspective, what does this look like in practice? What is the actual value add of blockchain for education?
Okay, first I should say thank you to everyone for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's great to follow on from Chris. So my name is John DeMang. I'm a professor of computer science at the Open University, and I lead the Open University's Innovation Center. So I think I have the best job in the world, where I get up every morning and reinvent the OU, reinvent higher education. So just some background on the Open University. We're 51 years old. Our mission statement is social justice through education. And the word open in our title means you do not need any qualifications to study with us. So we're really about transforming lives. We have over 2 million graduates. Currently, we have 175,000 students. we have a MOOC platform which offers free learning, Future Learn. They have 10 million students, and we have millions more on the Open Learn in-house free education. The OU, since its inception, has always been into innovation. We were nearly called the University of the Air 51 years ago because radio was the big new technology. And then we've used TV, video, personal computers, and later the web, etc. And now we use blockchains. So Chris mentioned a couple of phrases which really struck home to me. He talked about an internet of education, skills libraries, and optimizing pathways. So our vision is to have what we call student sovereign accreditation. So an accreditation almost from when you were born that you own, you control, and you manage. Now, I don't believe that anyone in the call believes that education finishes when you're 21 or 22. You're going to be learning throughout your career, throughout your life. So if you're learning throughout your life, you're going to be learning on different platforms, at different universities, maybe on MOOC platforms and at work. So then it doesn't make sense for any one institution to somehow own or control your accreditation. It's obvious that you should control that because you're going to be learning in many different places. And what a blockchain can do is make that seamless. So we think about student sovereign accreditation. And then again, as Chris highlighted, we think of one data space. So if you have one trusted data space, you can link learners, educators, and employers. And then each can benefit from those seamless, trusted connections that distributed ledger technology will bring. So let me just talk about two projects. We have many, many projects. If you go to blockchain Open AC UK, you'll see what we're doing. Or if you Google blockchain and Open University, you'll find us. So the first one is the Institute of Coding. It's a £20 million funded project launched by our Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, in 2018, focused on computer science. So in the UK, we produce about 9,000 computer science graduates every year, and we're going to need to be producing closer to 30,000 a year to meet our demand for moving to digital. Also, it's a bit surprisingly, the computer science graduates that we provide aren't as employable as their other STEM colleagues. So the industry's requirements for skills, especially around competence, doesn't match what graduates do. So the Institute of Coding is about producing more graduates, producing graduates that are more competent towards industry skills, and also more diverse. So computer scientists are not as diverse as they should be. So one of the parts that we led at the Open University with IBM is a new accreditation standard. So a new accreditation standard for degrees, it's an add-on badge for competence. So students, if they go to an industry somehow through maybe an internship or maybe other means, they can get an IOC badge that says you are competent. For that, we use a framework which comes from industry called Sphere, which has 7 levels and different areas in computing. So it leads to a matrix with nearly 800 cells. We turn those 800 cells into open badges, which is hopefully a well-known standard, and they're verified on the blockchain. So you can do a degree. We have 38 universities in the Institute of Coding and 80 industry partners. And then you can get this extra qualification, which is validated on the blockchain for the learning where it occurred. So that's at the degree level. We also have what we call gateway badges to increase diversity. So we want to lower the barrier to entry to degree level qualifications. So then we offer boot camps, summer schools, one-day workshops, and then you can get a gateway badge either for attending or for some measure of accreditation. In the middle, there's a new European standard across the MOOC companies for something called a micro-credential, which represents 100 to 150 hours worth of learning. And we're beginning to offer blockchain-based badges for that. So our ambitious dream in Institute of Coding is to have these seamless transitions where you can start off with a bootcamp, do a few workshops or a summer school, they contribute to a micro-credential, do some micro credentials, they contribute to your degree, and then you can get competence. So we see a future where students are learning in any place, or all forms of learning are being recognized, and they can be, they're stackable and can be managed. So you do it at IBM, some at Microsoft, some in the MOOC, and they all count towards a qualification, which can connect folks. So that's the Institute of Coding. I could say a lot more, but time is relatively short. So I'll jump on to another project, my last project, which is a European funded project called Qualitychain. Here we're looking at improving how we recognize credentials and how we improve employability, those connections between credentials to employment across Europe in the public sector. In many European countries, there are actually public regulators that manage the civil service. So how you go into civil service from your qualifications. And what we're interested in Qualitychain is how can you really do this seamless connection in this one data space? How can you map from the credentials you're picking up anywhere to the qualifications you need to get a job? So what we do is we embed skills, verified skills, into open badges. So as you do a boot camp or a degree or a master's or whatever it is, your skills get accumulated and they're signed off in a way that can't be defrauded. Then we have machine learning programs that can machine read jobs online. So at one point in the previous project, we had 9 million jobs in data science. Now, Chris talked about these skills being important. So then you have a common language. The common language is skills between advertised jobs and what you're learning. Then we use semantic matching to map the skills between the two. So almost when you're asleep, you have your what we call smart badges finding jobs for you. So you look at your dashboard and you'll see jobs which you're now qualified for because of your skills. Also, the system, the pilot we built, will find also jobs for which you're nearly qualified for, and then courses which will fill the skills gap. So we view this as a first step towards an AI career coach. So having smart systems looking over verified data in a shared data space between educators, learners, and employers.
Thank you so much, John. That was really helpful, and the things that certainly at Lumina we've been using the phrase all learning counts, that we know people are gaining skills and competencies, whether they're at work, whether they're at home, and this really is something that I think you all are maximizing on to make sure that that learning counts for them, that they have those pathways to employment and to further education. So really appreciated your very specific practice example. So I'm going to ask both of you now, certainly this moment in time has presented us across the world with some unique challenges as people try to navigate disrupted economies, disrupted labor markets, maybe having to shift industries because they were working in an industry that has been hit pretty hard by COVID. So as you think about this moment in time, like why is now the moment to really push on this issue, to really explore blockchain and education? And in particular, I'd like to keep us focused on what will the learner gain, what will the worker gain out of this? And so Chris, I'll start with you and then come to John.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there are so many reasons, right? But to begin with, timing. Any good entrepreneur knows that the most important aspect of whether something will be successful or not is the timing. The timing is just very, very correct, right? In the sense that nothing we're talking about here is magic. Nothing is theoretical. The technology exists, it's proven, it's ready. The pilots have been done, infrastructure is being developed now by the smartest people in the world. So we are there, and that's an important piece of it. Another important piece is just understanding the paradigm here, right? I mean, the shift that happened in the financial and economies whenever MasterCard came along and said, we can allow for many different banks to transfer money with many different retailers on behalf of many different individuals. That was the shift from the check to the credit card. And it changed everything. If you can think about everything that changed because of that paradigm. Now we're doing the same, but it's a piece of paper transcript to a verifiable credential. And the same kind of, spiraling, myriad of change happens in that shift. And so when you think about it, why now? Well, you know, right now, because of COVID, the world is ready for leapfrogging. They're now going, what we were going to wait 5 or 10 years to do, we got to do it now. We got to get our students online. We have to connect our systems. And so again, it comes back to timing, but for a learner, this is really important, because if I can begin as a learner now, storing and saving all of my credentials and my achievements, then I'm actually building equity. This is a real thing. I'm collecting assets that are going to help me throughout my whole life. And we should be able to transfer not only between school to school and employer, but across borders. And verifiable credentials can start to help that happen as well. So as there's unrest and things happening around the world, you know, this is a way for you to carry your assets and not lose them, which is a really important aspect of the modern world.
Thank you, John.
Hi, yeah, so yeah, great question. So probably 3 points I would make. Of course, we're living in a time with dire consequences, but it's driving innovation. What my view is that there are structural weaknesses in society and economy, and they're being exposed by the X-ray that is the global pandemic. And that includes structural weaknesses in education and in higher education. So 3 points I would make is, you see, of course, I'm in the UK, so I see the UK scene closer, but we're moving, universities are moving or struggling to teach online. So you see even prestigious universities, Cambridge, have announced that they will only teach online for the next academic year. And it's not something that they're used to. So, whereas at the OU, we've been doing it for a long time. And what I've been pushing for in separate conversations is to move what I call from a cottage industry approach. Every educator tries to create their own online materials, to one where you have a team approach where you can have excellence. So at the OU, we know about this because, for example, we get the BBC to make our videos. So anything you see with David Attenborough, like Blue Planet 2, it's a co-production between the Open University and the BBC. So rather than every educator or every professor creating the materials online, have centers of excellence that do this. And then you can have a Uber-style micropayment system where students and other professors who use materials can rate those. And also you can have a micropayment. So the professor who delivers, it doesn't have to be the professor who created the materials. So then you can have a payment system and a reputation system based on a blockchain. So that's one place it can help. The second one is, you've mentioned this in the US, and we'll have it in the UK. It's probably the #1 concern for our government, apart from the pandemic itself, is the high unemployment. There's going to be high unemployment very soon. We're going to need flexible, agile means for teaching, but very specific. For example, teaching someone in one industry, maybe someone who's in a shop, to train to work in a hospital. So very specific things. So you need this anywhere, anytime connection. And again, blockchains can help in delivering that in a secure fashion. Another thing which is slightly tangential is in the US, you've had a lot of concerns around the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's been a big concern in the UK. In fact, the Vice Chancellor of the Open University tweeted that it diminished him as a white person in what he saw. And we've created a new post, a new dean level post on equality and diversity. One of the things we're doing in our lab is we have an analytics tool which predicts with 95% accuracy, is this student going to pass the next assignment and they're going to pass the course. We're extending this at the moment to link it to ethnicity, take into account privacy concerns, and to see if we can spot parts of our courses which disproportionately affect certain folks with certain ethnicities. Now, if you imagine you have an analytics tool doing this, we have 175,000 students, 10 million on FutureLearn. Imagine if you're doing this at national scale in an anonymized form, but verified, and then you're looking for analytics. So I think one of the things that you can do with a distributed ledger is have anonymized, secure, verified, fine-grained measurements. almost at the click level for students, and then look for patterns, including the disproportionate effects of learning on students with certain ethnicities and attainment gaps in that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. There are some great questions coming in to the Q&A, so I'm really excited. One of them applies to what we were just speaking of, so I'm going to pull it now, but know that if you put a question in the chat, we will definitely get to it, so keep them coming in. But Chris and John, something that has been raised by guests Noah and Spencer essentially is, getting into this detail that John, you were just talking about, of how do we ensure that the algorithms we're using don't become gatekeeping and perpetuate that historical inequity, rather than, again, the goal here is to counterbalance them. And so the important part of this is obviously keeping the learner at the center of the work. So how do we keep students at the center, learners at the center, as we develop these solutions and ensure that the technology doesn't continue to exacerbate the inequalities we see?
So I can answer that first if you want. So this is very pertinent to us. I don't know if you've been catching the news from the UK. So either yesterday or the day before, the UK government basically turned off the algorithm, which was determining the results which our 18-year-olds get, because there were too many complaints. So when you're 18, you sit what are called A-levels, and then you need certain grades to go to our universities. And there was so much bias, the government, after saying on Saturday, we're not backtracking, they backtracked and turned the algorithm off. So in general, at the OU, we have an analytics policy. We have an ethical policy, which is on our website. And we say that no decision should be made without a human in the loop. If I think about blockchain and how that can help. So one of the great things about a blockchain is that you can record everything forever. It's immutable. And then what you can do is you disaggregate what you're recording from the decisions you make on top of that. So we could, for example, record every individual student's score for every test and every assignment they make. We could record who marked that assignment and how was it graded. And then if at a later stage we decide, oh, by the way, this system, this algorithm, this marker, this school, this state is biased, we can recalculate based on the verified result. So it's that disaggregation and that ability to look back and make changes forever, which is great, as well as the fact that everything is owned and controlled by the students. So there's no reason why the algorithms themselves couldn't go on the blockchain for everyone to look at, including the students. So when the students get a result, they can say, this is the data that will produce the result, and this is the algorithm. And then I can examine that. So it dramatically increased transparency will help.
That's great. Thank you for that. In the spirit of time, I'm going to move us on to the next item on the agenda. Again, keep those Q&A questions coming in, and thank you again to Spencer and Noah who gave us those. So you'll see Chris, John, and I disappear from your screen, and I'm going to turn this over to Louis Suarez from the American Council on Education, and I'll be back after that.
Thank you, Amber and John and Chris. That was a terrific way to get us kicked off. You know, I want to, much of what I say will echo pieces that you've heard Chris and John reflect on. And I just want to assert at the get-go that in the research report, the way we defined a blockchain was it's a distributed peer-to-peer ledger that's comprised of blocks that have a timestamp on them. And they also each have a unique hashtag, and they're shared across a network of computers. This gives a blockchain a variety of attributes, like immutability that John talked about, trust built into the algorithm, transparency as a result of those previous two, that make it a really interesting tool for storing many, many different kinds of transactions, including human capital transactions. And in the research report, we essentially interviewed a variety of stakeholders that are conducting blockchain and education experiments. And I'll do some of the thematics of what we learned and then hand it off to Carrie. So there were three broad themes that we discovered about the way blockchain is being applied in education. And we were working from an N of about 70 different experiments that we found. Three themes are use of blockchain in lifelong learning and credentialing, personal data agency and privacy, and the value of connected ecosystems. With lifelong learning, what we're seeing are many of the experiments that we're seeing, the proofs of concept that we're seeing developed for education purposes, are ones like the ones that John in particular was describing, where there are folks that are trying to get credentials, the labor market's changing quickly, they're having to reskill or upskill, and figuring out how we make that human capital more fluid so that it's traveling across the stakeholders and recognized as quickly as possible to ease those transitions and that mobility. As a result, we're, personal data, who controls the data? Who controls the data, who has agency over that data, and how do you maintain privacy over the data is an emerging issue. I would say that it's approached with almost an evangelical zeal in these proof points. It's how do we help the data flow, but also allow the end user learner to have the most control and agency over how it's used. And then finally, with all the heady wonderful uses we have with the underlying technologies, that many of the most evolved or most developed proofs of concept projects that we're seeing are deeply steeped in human connected ecosystems. So there were groups of stakeholders, nonprofit organizations in a place-based setting with university partners, with employers, and they were each trying to solve issues around closing equity gaps in education, enhancing education attainment in a certain area, better connecting employers with talented learners. And though they were those human players coming together to try to solve that problem creates a really fertile ground for the blockchain technology to serve as a solution to help make all that human capital information flow across the variety of transactions you can imagine are happening there. With that being said, I want to do a handoff to Carrie so she can talk a little bit about deeper aspects of the report in our findings.
Hey, Lewis, thank you. Actually, what I'm going to talk more about today is the white paper on interoperability. Although the white paper does support what came out of the report, which is fueling this innovation challenge, right? This innovation challenge is about building ecosystem first, taking ecosystem first to building blockchain systems. And what we found in the report was that, like Lewis had said, that personal data agency is important, that lifelong learning, as we've heard throughout this whole webinar, is something that's being recognized more globally now than it had been prior, in like previous years. And another thing that's really important is interoperability. And so what we did was we wrote a white paper to discuss more about the interoperability of data in education. And I worked on this white paper with Sharon Liu at the Department of Ed Office of Education Technology, also with Deb Everhart at the Credential Engine, and Greg Nadeau from Public Consulting Group and Ed 3.0. And like I had said earlier, the purpose of the paper is to support the Blockchain Innovation Challenge and to explain what interoperable standards in education are, how they work, and why they matter. So, so like I was saying, the report sort of emphasizes the importance of individuals having agency over their data. But it's really hard to do that right now because learners and employment data are stored with institutions and employers. So not only do individuals not have direct access to their data, but because it's stored with the entities, the data formatting and the structure serves their needs and not the needs of the learners. And so if we want the learners to be able to control their data, we need to be able to get it to them securely and safely where they can do what they need to do with it for their opportunities. And so this is where standards and interoperability come into play. And I won't dig into this too much more, but I'm just going to give you a basic overview of how it works and then point we can point you to the paper later. So open standards, such as the W3C verifiable credentials and the decentralized identifiers, enable interoperability by providing structured terms that can describe learning and work-related records, who issued the records, who earned them, and how the records can be verified. And while education institutions and training providers, hiring agents, and employers may be operating in different domains, interoperability can make the bridge that connects them and allows that data to be shared amongst them. It could also align their efforts, and it could strengthen perceptions of the trust of data if it can be better understood. And it could also be known where it's coming from, right? There's also the learner and employment record specification, which describes how the interoperable and verifiable education and workforce records can be unified in an application like a digital CV and credential wallets that individuals can control on their own devices like their phones. So the white paper goes into this more, and I'm going to provide some scenarios that show how interoperability creates more efficient ecosystems, which is really something we're looking at from the perspective of this initiative. So I would suggest that anyone involved in ed tech should read this white paper, but I'm especially recommending it to those who are interested in entering the Blockchain Innovation Challenge, and that they use this as a reference. So interoperability is the first step to increasing the clarity of data within ecosystems and across ecosystems. And Taylor is going to explain next how interoperability is one of the main objectives of the challenge and how it fits in.
Before I dive into the application guidelines, we're going to watch a video that ACE has put together for the Blockchain Innovation Challenge.
A disconnect has long existed between education and employment. Even prior to the pandemic, nearly 4 in 10 recent college graduates were underemployed. Now, as our nation faces mass unemployment, addressing the interoperability between education and employment is more important than ever. The American Council on Education's Blockchain Innovation Challenge seeks bold ideas to reorient the education and employment ecosystem around the individuals they aim to serve. The challenge invites teams to create a vision and design pilot projects that meet 3 themes. Empower all learners by giving them agency over their digital identities, including records of learning. Unlock lifelong learning by better documenting, validating, and sharing skills and competencies no matter where they're learned. Improve economic mobility by enabling learners to access and utilize employment-relevant skills. The Blockchain Innovation Challenge expects to make awards totaling $900,000 to winners. The Blockchain Innovation Challenge expects for teams to have an ecosystem-first design approach that will address at least one of the following characteristics. Building community and consensus by partnering with existing institutions and organizations that seek to help others achieve economic mobility. Interoperability and open design that leverage existing and open standards to ensure ecosystems can scale and be replicated. Data literacy and agency to allow learners to control their data and be able to seamlessly traverse lifelong pathways of learning and work. As an example of an ecosystem-first approach, Dallas College, the University of North Texas at Dallas, and several Dallas area K-12 school districts created a blockchain network to help students transition between schools or between school and the workforce. Blockchain enabled students to have control over their learning records, which made it easier for them to enroll in college or apply for jobs. The ecosystem included K-12 public schools, employers, colleges, food banks, and workforce development and public transportation agencies. Now, we must be more willing than ever to test innovations that can equitably help learners achieve the dreams of opportunity enabled by education. Your creativity and experimentation are essential. The Blockchain Innovation Challenge is now open at www.ace.edu/BIC, with applications due on October 30th, 2020.
So I don't know about everybody else, but I am super excited about the blockchain challenge. I know it's hard to, be excited about the future of education and the opportunities that it can provide for learners across the country and throughout the globe in the midst of a global pandemic. But, you know, hearing Chris and John talk about all the future that blockchain and what it can provide for learners and the solutions that it can be is super promising. And that's why at the forum, we're super excited to be partners with ACE and the Department of Education on this challenge. So we've decided to break the evaluation criteria for each application that comes in down to 3 segments. And these are the quality of the ecosystem first design approach, the quality of your technology approach, and the quality of your management plan and the adequacy of resources. And we decided to kind of keep it broad and focus on these 3 areas for criteria, because we want to give you as applicants as much creative flexibility and freedom as possible. We want you to be true innovators and identify what the solutions are for your ecosystem, for the needs of your learners, for the needs of the employers in your area, for the needs of your institution, and for the needs of your technology company. We want to give you as much, you know, creative freedom as possible to be innovative and really take this and run with it. So that's why we've kind of gone that approach, is to give you some broad guidelines, kind of give you like the playing field, but let you be creative on how you're going to operate. So we'll move on to the next slide. We'll talk a little about the ecosystem first design approach. So we've seen some questions in the chat talking about, you know, learners. We had Chris and John really talk about the importance of, you know, making sure that any innovation is learner centric, and we want people to apply with an ecosystem first approach. And you know, we kind of believe that any good ecosystem first approach has learners at the center of that ecosystem and is trying to support learners and providing them with as many opportunities as possible. So when we're reviewing and your applications, we want to make sure that you've described the problem and that you've identified that blockchain is the appropriate solution to the problem that you've identified, and that the blockchain system that you're going to develop has potential to generate impact during and beyond the window. And that window being, you know, late December, early of this year through September of next year. We want to make sure that there's impact that can happen during the challenge and then beyond. We also want to make sure that your ecosystem is comprehensive, that you've identified the right partners for your ecosystem, and that you have the right stakeholders involved, and that, again, learners are at the center of that ecosystem. And again, you know, talking about the flow of data, we want to make sure that you understand how data needs to flow throughout your ecosystem. We want to make sure that the interoperability isn't just a technical component, but is also a component throughout your approach, that we want to make sure that the data is flowing appropriately and correctly throughout. And then again, the last 2 are really just the main goals and themes for the challenge are empowering learners and promoting social mobility. We want to make sure that we are providing learners with as many personalized pathways as possible throughout their life. They all have, you know, every learner has unique challenges as, you know, they have to overcome as they, you know, navigate their employment and education, and giving them the power to control their records and own those records really can help them gain that social and economic mobility that they need. So the next is the quality of your technology approach. We just want to make sure that your team has the technical capacity to meet the objectives of your blockchain proposal, and that you are conforming with the open standards and interoperability. And Carrie and her team did a great job on putting together that interoperability white paper. And I encourage everybody to read that white paper to make sure you understand when we're talking about interoperability for your blockchain system, that you're meeting what that conformance standards are. And then I saw a question earlier about data security and privacy. You know, we also want to make sure that any system you create is compliant with all federal regulations, any other regulations that your institution has to comply with. And then again, that this is all about making sure that the learners have control of their identity, that they are the ones that are in control of their future because they are in control of their skills portfolio that Chris was talking about. And last but not least, we also want to make sure that we're going to review the quality of your management plan and the adequacy of your resources. We want to make sure that you've got the right team qualifications, not only to develop a blockchain system, but also to make sure that you're providing as much support and opportunity for the learners within your ecosystem, and that you've navigated and identified the right employer partners, the right K-12 partners, the right, whoever you've brought into your ecosystem, that you've identified the right players and partners for that ecosystem to make sure that it's, can thrive, not just during the challenge, but beyond. We also make sure that, you know, since this is a federally funded challenge, we want to make sure that you're going to be good stewards of those federal funds. So we want to make sure that you've got a sound budget proposal and that you also have a post-challenge business plan. And that means when we talk about impact, not just during the challenge, but beyond, is that there's a plan in place to make sure that these blockchain systems will be funded to make sure that there is a chance, there's the ability to create a difference and really allow learners to see the benefits of this blockchain system beyond the window of the challenge. Now, I know that there's, that's the crux of it. Again, we kind of kept it light on the details. We want to give you the framework to operate within, so that way you can be creative and innovative in your approach to meet the needs of the learners in your system and the needs of the unique players within your ecosystem. Now, there is, we'll hopefully try and get to most of the questions today, but if we don't have a chance to get to all the questions today, you know, Amber mentioned earlier on the Engage group. So on the Engage platform that ACE has created, there is a blockchain innovation group. And there is where you'll have people on the team, on the Blockchain Innovation Challenge team like myself, and Carrie and others there, where you can engage with us directly to answer your questions. You can post questions there. You can also meet and network with other people who are interested in the challenge. And so I really encourage everybody to create, if you don't have an Engage account, create one and search for the Blockchain Innovation Group and join it, because it's a great place to really get to know others who are interested in the challenge and get answers to your questions that may be specific to your application. We are also going to be providing some unique networking and engagement opportunities on Engage through some Zoom activities that we'll be doing for those who are on the Engage platform. So I really encourage everybody to go and join the group so that we can have a robust community and really help each other identify the potential of blockchain for your ecosystem and answer any questions you may have about the challenge or just in general. I'll turn it back over to Amber, and then hopefully we'll have some time for your Q&A at the end.
Great. Before you run away, Taylor, though,
Yes.
I have two questions for you. Again, lively chat happening here. So one of the questions that came in is a great question that, since we've talked about lifelong learning, how is the learner defined in this challenge? Can we be looking at the learner anywhere along their lifelong learning cycle?
Yeah, so for the purpose of this challenge, a learner can be anybody throughout their lifelong. We want to promote lifelong learning. So whether they're in a pre-K through 12 school or in college, or they're an adult learner that is 40 years in their career and is looking to reskill, we want to make sure that we're providing that blockchain can serve anybody on the, in the spectrum of what a learner is.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Good question. Wonderful. Well, now what I'd like to do, I think we've gotten several of the technical questions. There were some questions here in the chat that are extremely technical. And so what we want to encourage you to do is to get on Engage and engage with your colleagues on some of these more technical aspects of questions, including, Phil, you asked a great question about applicant tracking systems and HR systems and how they consume these credentials and algorithms to read them. And so I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about that, but it would probably be better to do that in the Engage platform. That's an example of a question I would definitely take there. So next, what we'd like to do is we actually have two people who have volunteered because they are just as excited as we are about blockchain and the potential here. And so I would love to ask Jess Stahl from Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. Hi, Jess. Welcome. We'd love to just hear from you. Like, what excites you about this and what's your ideas for the challenge?
Sure. So by way of introduction, I'm Jess Stahl. I'm the Vice President for Data Science and Analytics at the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities, and we accredit all of the academic institutions across 7 states and part of British Columbia, Canada. I am also the Chief Data Officer for a major grant from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation called Intermediaries for Scale, and I direct another Gates Foundation grant called the PDP Accelerator to onboard hundreds of institutions into the post-secondary data partnership. And I also have a very strong interest in data equity and ethics, in particular with data science and AI systems. And so I work a lot with secure and private AI as well. And over the past 2 years, I've been a member of several working groups for the T3 Innovation Network, which was focused specifically on blockchain-based credentials and learner and employer records and interoperability throughout the entire talent pipeline as a whole. So I was super excited to read the ACE report on education and workforce opportunity through blockchain and to discover the Blockchain Innovation Challenge. So what I would like, I'm interested in all of the themes, all three, and I'm looking forward to making a big contribution to a team that will work across all of the 3 key opportunity areas. I have a technical background and about 10 years in higher ed leadership. So I'm looking to join forces with a really strong team for this challenge. You can find me inside the Engage platform, or you can reach out to me at jstahl, JSTAHL, at nwccu.org.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jess. I think it's a great example. People don't often expect that a regional creditor would be at the table. So thank you for being excited, being part of all those initiatives that have given us the infrastructure to address this challenge. Next, I would like to ask Ryan Williams. Ryan, would you turn on your screen and come join us? Ryan's with the Blockchain Academy.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Amber. As mentioned, I'm Ryan Williams with the Blockchain Academy. What we're doing is partnering with colleges, universities to really help scale blockchain education, because it's really hard. We're finding at these college universities to hire PhDs, develop programs, and they're just lacking the kind of real practical application, which is needed in this space for skill attainment and to grow the workforce that's desperately needed as these skill gaps grow. So we're providing programs in a turnkey nature to work with schools to get them started, and should they want to develop their own program, that's great. The real 1-2 punch that we're trying to help with industry is not just the education program, but provide pathways to jobs, and more importantly, build teams to build MVPs, because that's what this industry needs. We need MVPs. So I'm building a coalition to apply to this challenge. I'm very excited about it. There needs to be leadership in this space. So thank you, ACE. And really build teams to tackle these 3 areas, and then have teams kind of do a pitch day and things like that, and really have VCs on the back end of these incubations and acceleration programs, really to put it out into the wild, right? And speaking of, very quickly, I think we all need to establish benchmarks in this space on the certification side of things, because right now it's kind of the Wild West, right? It kind of reminds me of the earlier solar days when education was pushing solar and getting it out there. And now there's a ton of demand, but we need to establish those skill benchmarks in this space very quickly, because then it's just going to be, 500 different providers training towards their own certification. So we need to establish benchmarks. That's something I'd like to help be a part of. And I feel like with these challenges, there's going to be some great, amazing things, and I'm very happy to participate. And I appreciate the leadership here, because we need a lot more of it if we're going to compete on a national scale on the protocol side of things. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ryan. I'm going to now ask Taylor to come back. So Taylor, a couple questions came in about the challenge. So one question was, would implementations that include commercial distributed ledger technology offerings that support the intent of this challenge qualify, or do these need to be ground up development?
So we aren't, we want people to, we're excited about blockchain and the potential it has in education. So whether your blockchain platform is, startup stage or end stage, we aren't going to be too particular. We just want to make sure that there's going to be new impact. So if it's going to be something that's building off an existing platform or a commercial technology, that how is it going to be repurposed, and how is it going to meet the needs of the learners within that ecosystem?
Great. And one more question is related. I think I know the answer to it though. Does learning have to be through academia? What about e-learning providers, workforce providers? We care about all learning, right?
Yeah, we care about all learning. Like I said, it doesn't matter, whether the blockchain application is for a 3-year-old learner or an 85-year-old learner. We don't care, and it's all about providing opportunities to make sure that learners have as many pathways as possible for their education dreams and their career dreams.
Great. And one more question. Does the challenge expect employers to be able to search through learners' credentials with their consent?
I think it's gonna, that's how you, depends on how you build your ecosystem and how you build your blockchain network.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's not a requirement, but certainly if that's something in the network that of the challenge project.
Yeah, we want there to be interoperability. And so if you're gonna have an employer partner, then there needs to be that interoperability that exists.
Perfect. And Spitfire here for Taylor.
Yep.
How many awards do we anticipate giving out?
So we anticipate giving out 4 phase 1 awards and up to 4 phase 2 awards. So phase 1 will begin in late December, early January. And then teams will have 4 months to develop their minimum viable product. And then those will be evaluated at the end of April. And then in May, we identify which minimum viable products have met the criteria to move on to phase 2.
Great. And I think this is the last one. Can organizations, agencies, institutions, can you support multiple applications? So can I apply more than once?
Yeah, you can apply more than once. Just, you know, realize that you're going to be competing against yourself potentially, but you're also, if you're going to be the main applicant on more than one application, make sure that there is some sort of identifiable difference between the two, as whether it's the name of the project or the name of your ecosystem, so that way when we're reviewing them, they don't get mixed up.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. There are some additional questions coming in, but I want to, in the interest of time, we're going to be directing those again to that Engage platform. There should be a short URL showing up in your chat. Again, we've created this as a way to keep the conversation going. So if you have additional, again, technical questions or questions about the application process, please know that you can go there and there will be people to respond. But also the great piece is that's your community. And so everyone who is involved and interested, it really is a safe place to go and have broader conversations. Maybe you want to network and meet new partners to join, you know, your initiative that you're trying to get going. So really see that as your community here. The other thing I would say is just thank you for joining and thank you for your excitement. We hope to have you all apply to the Blockchain Innovation Challenge, which again is open till October 30th. Make sure you get on that Engage platform. And before you leave, if you could please complete a short survey that will be appearing on your screen shortly, it would really help us understand how to continue to facilitate this work. So again, thank you for joining. Thank you to all our presenters today. Please fill out the survey and we look forward to seeing you on Engage.